uh, they were enslaved in Egypt, God rose Moses up and sent Moses back to lead his children, to lead God's children out of slavery. And he led them into the wilderness where they wandered for 40 years. And in the wilderness, things were not always grassy and what we would call good pasturing, or that they had a lot of water. And yet, throughout all of their complaints, the Lord fed them and gave them what they needed. In fact, in Deuteronomy, it says, "These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you, and you lacked nothing." And the Psalm says in Psalm 23:1, "The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want." Those words, not want and lacked nothing, that's the same word in Hebrew. It's to remind us that even in the hardest of times, God is with us. In Exodus 15, God says, or Moses writes, "In your steadfast love, in your mercy, you led the people whom you redeemed, and you guided them by your strength to your holy abode." And in Psalm 23:2, he says, "He makes us to lie down in the green pastures, and he leads us beside the still pasture." And in 3, he leads us on the right paths, just as that's the same word in the Exodus 15, when God guided, God led them by their strength, or by his strength, into your holy abode. You can go through the whole psalm, verse by verse, and the story in Exodus and Deuteronomy, and find these very tight connections, to know that here you have the psalmist reaching back into the history of Israel, reaching back to that defining crisis when they were brought together by God and led through the wilderness to find their freedom. That's what the psalmist is talking about. He's deliberately bringing back to mind that Exodus experience, that time when the people had nothing and were fully reliant upon God for everything, for the food that they ate that came as the manna and the quail, for the water that they drank from the rocks where Moses, remember, spoke and hit the rock, and they had water that they were not to have before. In that time in the wilderness, where God was forming them into a people, God took care of them totally. And that's what the psalmist is trying to recall. Now, if you remember the history of Israel, that time in the wilderness wasn't the only time where they had to fall back and rely and trust on God when things weren't going well. There was also the exile, when their entire country was destroyed, overrun by war, and all of the people were taken away. Those that weren't killed were taken away to Babylon and to Assyria, and out of their country to places where they had to start over, where they were captives. Once again, not their own people, not their own nation. And at the end of that time, God led them back to Israel. These words, or this time, is also brought up in the consciousness of any Israelite, any Jewish person who reads the 23rd Psalm. And that kind of reflects back to, even in the valley of the shadow of death, even into the time of deepest darkness, even that time when when we don't know what's going on, and everything seems lost and no one seems to be in charge and we just don't know, even there, God is in charge. And that speaks to us today, because it seems like we don't have any control. We don't know what's going on. I had a Zoom class this week, and we went around the screen like the Brady Bunch, and we each started the class by giving kind of a 30-second, this is where I am, and this is what's going on with me, and this is how I'm doing with the classwork. And we got to one of my classmates who's in a New York City borough. And she said, this has been a hard week. 18 people, 18 of my colleagues died this week. And 100 people in my building have died. And the rest of us were just, I can't imagine. I can't imagine being able to function, to come to class, to come to lead worship, to be able to function if 18 of my colleagues had died that week. Yea, though I lead you through the valley of the shadow of death, I will be with you. God is protecting us, leading us through. There are people today, right now, who are going through that. And maybe it's not as huge as losing 18 colleagues and 100 this week and 100 people in your building. Maybe it's you've lost a family member. Maybe it's you have your aunt, your great aunt, or your friend who is suffering and going through the end of time, the end of their time here on this earth. But even in that, we have the security that God is with us. Even in the face of that enemy called death, God is with us. I don't have words to comfort my colleague with what she's going through. But the thing is that God does. And the lovely thing about this prayer, the 23rd Psalm, is something that we take for granted that I don't even know if we notice. The 23rd Psalm is one of the very few Psalms, one of the very few, it's not even a lament, one of the very few places that it says, I and you. It's personal. It's not we, the people, we, Israel, we, the church, we, this congregation. It's I. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. This takes us from the idea of the community and the communal to the personal. God cares for me. Not just the church as a whole, not just the world as a whole, not just the whole community. God cares for me. And this is the strength of the 23rd Psalm. This is the unusual part of the 23rd Psalm. And this is something we're so used to that I don't think we even hear it when we read the 23rd Psalm, because it's written for just me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me through the deepest and darkest valley. I will fear no evil, for thou, Lord, you are with me. That is a comfort, and Jesus, of course, picked up on that comfort when he called himself the Good Shepherd in John. He said, I am the Good Shepherd. And he was referring back to and probably reminding people of this psalm at that time. So that's the wonderful stuff that I have out of this psalm. If you have any wonderful insights, I would love to hear them. You can send them to me, say them, or chat them. And as we prepare to close our worship time together, I know that Sue has something delightful for us. So Sue, I'm turning this back to you. Sue?
Thank you. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be with God our Creator. Children all are we. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my solemn vow, to take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
Thank you, Sue, for my Henderson congregation. I'm sure that was a welcome, familiar song that we use on usually this first Sunday to close our worship. So if you join me in the benediction, Lord, we would follow you wherever you might lead. Lord, we would follow you and forgive us when we stumble and when we stray. Forgive us when distracted we lose our way. Be the one to whom we turn, whose hand we hold, the shepherd who leads us safely to the fold. Lord, we would follow you wherever you might lead. Lord, we would follow you. Go in peace. If you found this service meaningful, we will be meeting, for the next 2 weeks in Zoom until we can return to our brick and mortar buildings. And boy, I sure do hope that we can return soon to our brick and mortar buildings. And you are welcome to join us here on Zoom. Any tithes, offerings, or donations can be sent to our congregations or to the Lake Ontario Parish. Sue's putting that up for us. Whoops. As soon as she gets through that right now. There we go. Please join us on the Facebook at the Lake Ontario Parish page. There we will share. I don't know if I'm muted or not. Nope, I'm not. There we will share on the Facebook page of the Lake Ontario Parish. We are sharing our faith journey. So if you have any joys or concerns, please put them up there or send them to Lydia. And happy Easter. We'll see you again next week. Bye.
I have unmuted everyone so you can visit.
Okay, so now we
Thank
can
you.
visit.
Thank you, Sue.